Deep in the woods where sunlight struggles to pierce the canopy, a heartbroken dog had given up. Abandoned and utterly alone, he was sure he'd never see a friendly face again. His world had shrunk to a small, damp patch of earth under a sprawling fern. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light and the gnawing emptiness in his belly. He was a ghost in his own life, a silent witness to the forest's indifferent rhythm. The squirrels chattered and the birds sang, but for him, there was only silence. His name was a forgotten whisper, lost to the traumatic day he was left behind. He remembered the car ride, the sudden stop, the joyous chase for a favorite toy, and then the slam of a car door and an engine roaring away. He waited, of course. He waited with the unwavering loyalty only a dog has. Certain it was all a terrible mistake. But the car never came back. The toy became a sodden relic, and hope flickered out, leaving only despair. He was a creature defined by absence, of food, of warmth, of a gentle hand. And as experts will tell you, when dogs are abandoned, they can be left with a psychological trauma that may never fully heal. Now he was just a shape in the shadows. His once handsome coat was a matted mess of mud and sorrow, and his ribs were a stark cage beneath his skin. His paws, raw and sore from pointless wandering, throbbed with a dull ache. He'd tried to fend for himself, but domestic animals aren't equipped to survive in the wild. They lack the skills to find food or protect themselves. He chased scents that led nowhere and drank from murky puddles that soured his stomach. Fear was a cold knot in his gut. Every snap of a twig sent terror through him. He had learned to make himself small, to curl into the hollow of a log and pray for invisibility. The nights were the worst, filled with the glowing eyes of creatures whose world this truly was. He had given up. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. This is Bear's story, a powerful testament to hope, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. But his story isn't unique. Millions of animals just like him are waiting in shelters or struggling on the streets. In 2023 alone, around 3.2 million dogs entered shelters in the United States, each with their own story of abandonment, neglect, or simply being unwanted. Bear's journey from the depths of despair to the warmth of a loving home reminds us that every animal deserves a second chance. It shows us that even the most broken spirits can heal when given patience, safety, and unwavering love. This story is not just about rescue, but a redemption for Bear and for the two strangers whose lives would be forever changed by one fateful afternoon in the woods. You have the power to create a transformation just like this one. If you're thinking about adding a pet to your family, please consider adoption. Visit your local animal shelter or rescue organization. If you're not in a position to adopt, you can still make a huge difference. Shelters rely on volunteers to walk dogs and on donations for food and medical care. Every contribution helps save a life. By sharing stories like Bear's, we can show the world that every animal is worth saving. Together, we can make a difference, one rescue at a time. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit the subscribe button and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah and Ben were hiking a barely there trail, seeking the quiet beauty of the deep woods. They walked in comfortable silence, their boots crunching on fallen leaves, the air smelling of damp earth and pine. It was a perfect day, the kind where the world seems to pause, offering a moment of peace in lives that had grown too busy, too rushed. Sarah, a veterinary technician with kind eyes and capable hands, had suggested this hike as a way to disconnect from the chaos of their daily routines. Ben, a high school teacher with a gentle demeanor and endless patience, had readily agreed. They'd been together for 5 years, and these quiet adventures into nature were their way of reconnecting, of remembering what mattered most. But then a sound. It was faint, almost lost in the whisper of the wind, a low, guttural whine. It wasn't the sound of any wild creature they knew. It was a sound of pure misery, of suffering so profound it seemed to emanate from the earth itself. They stopped listening. There it was again, a broken cry that seemed to be pulled from the soul of the forest. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her professional instincts immediately alert. Ben nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. "It sounds like an animal in distress." Exchanging a look that needed no words, they moved off the path, pushing through the undergrowth. Following the sound, branches caught at their clothing, and thorns scratched their hands, but they pressed on, guided by that pitiful whine that seemed to grow weaker with each passing moment. There, tucked behind the massive roots of an ancient oak, they saw him. At first, he was just a heap of matted fur, barely distinguishable from the forest floor. But then he lifted a weary head, and 2 terrified eyes stared back at them, eyes that held depths of suffering and betrayal that no animal should ever know. The dog was skeletal, his ribs protruding sharply beneath skin that seemed stretched too thin. He trembled violently, a leaf in a storm. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but it held no menace, only pure, unadulterated fear. Cornered and weak, he saw these 2 figures as the final threat, perhaps predators coming to end his miserable existence. Sarah's heart broke. In her years working with animals, she had seen neglect and abuse, but something about this dog's desperate condition struck her to the core. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. Ben put a calming hand on her arm, a silent reminder to move slowly. They both knew that any sudden movement could send the dog bolting into the depths of the forest, where he would surely die alone. They instinctively understood what to do. Stay calm. Use a soothing tone and avoid direct eye contact, which a scared dog can see as a threat. Slowly, carefully, they knelt, making themselves smaller and less intimidating. "Hey there, buddy," Ben said softly, his teacher's voice naturally soothing. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you. We want to help." The dog flinched, trying to disappear into the roots of the tree, to become one with the shadows that had been his only refuge. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his body tensed for flight despite his obvious weakness. Sarah remembered the jerky in her backpack, the emergency snack she always carried on hikes. Slowly telegraphing every movement, she unzipped her pack. The sound made the dog's ears flatten against his skull, but he didn't run. Perhaps he was too weak. Or perhaps some distant memory of human kindness kept him rooted in place. She took out a piece of jerky, the rich scent immediately filling the air. Holding it in her outstretched palm, she placed her hand on the ground a safe distance away, then slowly withdrew her arm. "It's for you," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay. No one's going to hurt you anymore." For a long, agonizing minute, the dog remained frozen, every muscle taut with indecision. Instinct screamed at him to run, to maintain the distance that had kept him alive these past terrible weeks. But the scent of food was a siren song, awakening a hunger so profound it overrode even his fear. Slowly, inch by agonizing inch, He crawled forward on his belly, his eyes never leaving their faces, watching for any sign of threat, any indication that this kindness was a trap. His movements were painful to watch, each inch of progress clearly costing him tremendous effort. Finally, he reached the jerky. He snatched it with desperate speed and retreated, gulping it down without chewing, as if afraid it might vanish. Then he looked up, his body tensed, waiting for the punishment that had surely accompanied every interaction with humans in his recent memory. But no punishment came. Instead, another piece of jerky appeared, this time a little closer to where Sarah knelt. The dog's eyes widened slightly, confusion mixing with the fear. And then another piece, closer still. It was a slow, delicate dance of trust and fear, hope and despair. Each piece of jerky brought him incrementally closer, building a fragile bridge across the chasm of his trauma. Finally, after what felt like hours but was perhaps only 20 minutes, he was close enough to lick the crumbs from Sarah's palm. As his rough tongue touched her skin, as he tasted salt and kindness, his tail gave a single weak thump against the ground. It was a tiny movement, barely perceptible, but to Sarah and Ben, it was a thunderclap of hope. The dog who had given up, who had resigned himself to dying alone in these woods, was starting to believe in the possibility of a friendly face again. That single tail thump was a turning point, but it was far from a surrender. When Sarah and Ben stood, ready to lead him out of the forest, the dog recoiled, whining, his eyes pleading with them not to make him move from this spot that, however miserable, had become his refuge. They knew immediately that they couldn't force him. Any attempt would shatter the fragile trust they'd just begun to build. Sarah made a decision. She sat on the ground, settling into a comfortable position that signaled she had all the time in the world. Then she just started talking. Not baby talk or the high-pitched cooing many people use with animals, but a calm, steady stream of words about her day, about the patients she'd seen at the clinic, about her own dog at home named Pepper, and about the warm bed waiting for this poor soul if only he would trust them enough to follow. While she spoke, Ben emptied his water bottle into a collapsible bowl and pushed it gently toward the dog. The animal watched suspiciously, but the jerky had made him thirsty. After a moment's hesitation, he crept forward and drank frantically, desperately, as if afraid the water might disappear. He drank until the bowl was empty, then licked it clean, his sides heaving. Then Ben had an idea. He took off his soft fleece jacket, which carried the scent of safety and home, laundry detergent, wood smoke from their fireplace, the faint smell of books from his classroom. He laid it on the ground near the dog, placing the last piece of jerky on top of the fabric. The dog hesitated, his hunger warring with his fear. Finally, survival instinct won. He limped forward, his sore paws clearly protesting every step, and snatched the jerky. But this time, he didn't retreat. He stood in the soft fabric, and something remarkable happened. He buried his nose in it, inhaling deeply, his eyes closing for just a moment. It was the scent of a world he had lost, a world of warmth and safety and belonging. "Come on, boy," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Let's go home." She stood slowly, then turned and took a few measured steps away. Ben followed her lead, and together they began walking slowly back toward the trail. They didn't look back, didn't call out, didn't pressure. They simply walked, putting faith in the connection they'd forged. The dog watched them go, and in his eyes a flicker of panic sparked to life. Was he being left behind again? Was this another abandonment? Another betrayal? The thought was suddenly more terrifying than following these strange humans into the unknown. With a pained whimper that seemed torn from his very soul, he took a step forward. Then another. And then, limping and trembling, he started to follow, Ben's jacket still clutched in his mouth. The journey out of the forest was slow and arduous, a test of patience that seemed to stretch time itself. They began calling him Bear, a name that seemed to fit his matted appearance and the unexpected courage he was showing with each painful step. The name also felt like a promise that he would grow into something strong and confident, that this skeletal creature would one day be healthy and whole. Bear kept a careful distance of about 10 feet, stopping often to catch his breath, trembling with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Each time he stopped, Sarah and Ben stopped too, never rushing him, never showing impatience. They offered quiet words of encouragement, creating a steady stream of gentle sounds that seemed to anchor him to their presence. "You're doing so well, Bear," Sarah would say, "just a little farther. You're so brave." The forest that had been his prison for weeks now became a gauntlet of memories and triggers. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every sound made him flinch. But the two humans ahead of him never wavered, never abandoned him. And slowly, incrementally, Bear began to believe that maybe this time was different. They had to cross a small stream, and Bear froze at the water's edge. He was thirsty again, his tongue lolling from the exertion. But the flowing water represented a barrier his exhausted mind couldn't process. Ben stepped into the stream first, then turned and knelt, cupping water in his hands and drinking to show it was safe. Bear watched, then tentatively stepped into the shallow water. It was cold and clean, and he drank deeply before following them across, his legs nearly buckling with the effort. As they neared the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned and the parking area came into view, Bear's steps grew even more hesitant. The open space represented something he'd learned to fear: exposure, vulnerability. But Sarah and Ben's steady presence kept him moving forward. When they finally emerged from the tree line, the late afternoon sun painted everything in gold. Sarah turned to see Bear standing at the forest's edge, silhouetted against the dark trees. For a moment he looked like he might bolt back into the shadows, but then he took that final step into the light, and something in his posture shifted. He had made his choice. Reaching the car presented another hurdle, one that Bear's traumatized mind translated into pure terror. For him, vehicles were monsters, metal beasts that had carried him to abandonment, that represented the moment his world had shattered. Sarah and Ben's blue sedan sat innocently in the gravel parking lot, but to Bear, it might as well have been a dragon. He froze 20 feet away, his body rigid, his breathing rapid. A low whine built in his throat, rising to a keening sound of distress that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. "It's okay, Bear," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "This is different. We're not leaving you. We're taking you home." But words meant nothing against the visceral memory of betrayal. Ben opened the back door slowly, and the familiar sound of car hinges made Bear back up several steps. They needed a different approach. Sarah got into the back seat, settling herself and patting the space beside her. "It's okay, Bear," she cooed, making her voice as soft and inviting as possible. "This is a good thing. This car is taking you somewhere warm and safe." Ben crinkled the empty jerky bag, and the sound, associated now with food and kindness, made Bear's ears perk slightly. Ben tossed it onto the seat beside Sarah, and Bear's nose twitched, tracking the scent. The dog stood there, torn between trauma and trust, his whole body shaking with the effort of the decision before him. Minutes passed. Sarah continued talking, painting pictures with words of warm blankets and full food bowls and gentle hands. Ben stood patiently by the door, making no move to approach or force. Finally, with a shuddering sigh that seemed to carry all his fear and hope in equal measure, Bear made his choice. He approached the car on trembling legs, paused at the open door as if standing on the edge of a cliff, then scrambled inside with desperate speed, collapsing at Sarah's feet. As Ben closed the door gently and started the engine, Bear pressed himself against the floor, shivering uncontrollably, but Sarah's hand found his head, stroking gently, and her voice wrapped around him like a blanket. As the car pulled out of the parking lot, the world of hunger and loneliness rushed away behind him, and for the first time in weeks, Bear allowed himself to hope. The sterile antiseptic scent of the emergency vet clinic sent a fresh wave of panic through Bear. Chemical smells mixed with the scent of fear from other animals created an overwhelming assault on his sensitive nose. He tried to back out the door, but Ben was there, not blocking him aggressively, but serving as a reassuring presence behind him, a gentle barrier between Bear and flight. The vet, Dr. Evans, was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen countless cases of neglect. She took one look at Bear and understood immediately what she was dealing with. She didn't loom over him or try to approach. Instead, she sat on the floor a few feet away, making herself small and non-threatening, letting Bear observe her. "Poor baby," she murmured, her voice professional but warm. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Her examination, conducted with infinite patience and gentleness, painted a grim picture. Bear was severely malnourished, weighing in at just 38 pounds when he should have been at least 60. His body was a roadmap of neglect and survival, multiple infected bite wounds from encounters with wild animals, raw and bleeding paws from weeks of wandering on rough terrain, and a pronounced limp from a deep infected gash on his right hind leg that would require surgical intervention. Most alarming was the layer of ticks and fleas covering his body, parasites that had been draining what little vitality he had left. Dr. Evans shook her head, making notes. "It's a miracle he survived at all," she said quietly to Sarah. "Another week and we'd be having a very different conversation." The first order of business was a bath, but the sound of running water sent Bear into a panic. The vet tech, a young man named Marcus with infinite patience, understood. He started with a warm, wet cloth on Bear's face, talking quietly about his own rescue dog. As the warm water gradually worked its way through Bear's matted fur, loosening weeks of accumulated filth, something remarkable happened. A long, low sigh escaped the dog, not of fear, but of surrender. It was as if his body recognized that it could finally stop fighting, that someone else was taking care of him now. The relief was so profound it was visible in every line of his body. Hours passed as the veterinary team worked on Bear. The bath revealed the extent of the matting. Large patches of fur had to be shaved away, removing not just filth, but the physical weight of his trauma. Underneath, his skin was pale and sensitive, but finally clean. Wrapped in a thick towel, he didn't fight the handling. Instead, he leaned into the comfort, as if he'd forgotten what warmth felt like. After his wounds were cleaned and treated, after the worst of the parasites were dealt with, Bear was given his first real meal. The vet tech placed a bowl of high-calorie food in a quiet kennel, a small, safe space with soft bedding and dim lighting. Bear approached it tentatively, as if expecting it to vanish, then buried his face in it and ate with a desperation that was heartbreaking to witness. He devoured everything in a frantic rush, licking the bowl so clean it could have been mistaken for new. When he was finished, he looked up, almost surprised that no one had taken the food away, that he'd been allowed to eat his fill. That night, lying on a soft bed, a mountain of plushness compared to the cold, hard ground of the forest, Bear couldn't relax at first. His body remained on high alert, muscles tensed, ears swiveling to catch every sound. Many abandoned animals suffer from a state of hypervigilance and anxiety, much like PTSD in humans. Their nervous systems remain activated, unable to recognize safety even when it's present. But as the hours passed in the quiet clinic, nothing bad happened, as his full belly and clean body sent signals of comfort to his traumatized brain. A bone-deep exhaustion began to take over. His head drooped, his breathing evened out, and his muscles finally released their tension. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Bear fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He was no longer just surviving, clinging to life by instinct alone. He was beginning to heal. The physical wounds would mend with time and treatment, but this first night of true rest was the beginning of healing the deeper wounds, the ones carved into his spirit by abandonment and fear. A week passed, and it became a ritual. Every single day, Sarah and Ben visited Bear at the clinic. They would come during their lunch breaks after work, whenever they could steal moments away. They sat by his kennel, sometimes reading aloud from books, sometimes just talking about their days, letting him get used to their constant, gentle presence. Bear was healing physically, his wounds were closing, his weight was slowly increasing, and the haunted look of starvation was beginning to fade from his eyes. But the psychological wounds ran deeper, carved into his psyche by abandonment and weeks of terror. He would watch his visitors warily, accepting treats but maintaining his emotional distance, as if afraid to believe this kindness was real. The turning point came on the 7th day. Sarah was sitting on the floor outside his kennel, tying her shoelace and talking absently about a difficult case at work. She felt eyes on her and looked up to see that Bear had risen and walked deliberately to the front of his kennel. He sat, his posture alert but not defensive, and watched her. When their eyes met, something shifted. He didn't cower, didn't look away. His gaze seemed to hold a question. "Can I trust you? Is this real?" "Hey, Bear," she whispered, her heart pounding with the significance of the moment. She slowly extended her fingers through the chain link, offering contact but not demanding it. Bear sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his nose touching her fingers, inhaling her scent. His tongue darted out, giving a soft, gentle lick, and then his tail, that tail that had been still for so long, gave a slow, tentative wag. One wag, then two. Then three, building momentum until his whole body was wiggling with an emotion he'd forgotten existed. Joy? Not the desperate gratitude of a starving creature given food, but real joy, the pure happiness of connection, of belonging, of believing he might finally be safe. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, sweet boy. You're going to be okay. You're going to come home with us." That was the key that unlocked everything else. Later that day, after a final checkup and a prescription for antibiotics and pain medication, Bear was discharged. The ride home was different from that first panicked journey from the forest. This time, Bear sat on the back seat between Sarah and Ben, looking out the window with cautious curiosity. The world rushing by, houses and people and other cars, was overwhelming, but the steady presence of his people on either side anchored him. When Sarah's hand found his head, he leaned into her touch instead of flinching away. They pulled into the driveway of a small house with a fenced yard, and Bear's first glimpse of what would be his home made his ears perk with interest. They moved slowly, letting him explore at his own pace. The house smelled of cooking and old books and safety, all the good human smells he'd once known and lost. But that first night at home brought new challenges. Bear had been given a soft bed in the corner of the living room, positioned so he could see the whole space and wouldn't feel trapped. He circled it several times before lying down, his body tense, unable to fully relax in this new environment. Then around midnight, a storm rolled in. The first crack of thunder shattered the quiet, and Bear leaped to his feet, trembling violently in the middle of the living room. His eyes were wide with panic, his breathing rapid. Every instinct screamed at him to find shelter, but where? Everything was still so new, so uncertain. Sarah heard him from the bedroom and came downstairs immediately. She found him frozen in place, shaking like a leaf. Without hesitation, she sat on the floor beside him. "It's okay, boy," she said softly. "You're inside now. You're safe. Nothing can hurt you here." Ben appeared moments later and sat on Bear's other side, placing a firm, reassuring hand on his back. The three of them sat there through the entire storm, through every crack of thunder and flash of lightning, creating a small island of safety in Bear's frightened world. And then something miraculous happened. Instead of trying to hide or escape, Bear made a choice. He walked over to Sarah and collapsed against her, pushing his head into her lap with a deep sigh. In that moment of surrender, of choosing to seek comfort instead of isolation, everything changed. He wasn't just a rescue anymore. He was their dog, and they were irrevocably, completely his people. The weeks that followed were a beautiful, gradual story of transformation. The skeletal creature from the forest faded like a bad dream, replaced by a dog discovering the joy of a second chance at life. Bear's new coat grew in thick and glossy, a rich brown with hints of red in the sunlight. The haunted, hollow look in his eyes was replaced by a soft, bright intelligence. He gained weight steadily until his sharp bones disappeared under healthy muscle, and he became the handsome, sturdy dog he was always meant to be. His first time playing was a moment Sarah and Ben would never forget. A squeaky ball had rolled near him while he was lying in a patch of sunlight. He nudged it with his nose, curious. It squeaked. He jumped back, startled, then approached again and nudged it harder. The sound seemed to delight him. Soon he was tossing it in the air with goofy abandon, pouncing on it and carrying it around like a trophy. Sarah and Ben watched with tears streaming down their faces as Bear's true personality, buried under layers of fear and pain, finally emerged. He was goofy and loving, always ready with a play bow and a waggling tail. He developed a funny habit of talking in low rumbles and grumbles when he wanted dinner, carrying on whole conversations in his own language. He discovered the supreme comfort of the sofa and could often be found sleeping on his back with all four paws in the air, snoring softly. His first real walk in the neighborhood was a sensory explosion. He was nervous around other dogs at first, the memory of those terrifying encounters in the forest still fresh. But with patient exposure, positive reinforcement, and Sarah's professional guidance, his fear gradually transformed into happy curiosity. He made friends with a golden retriever named Buddy who lived 3 houses down, and their play sessions became a highlight of his day. The dog who once cowered at the approach of a human hand now spent hours with his head in Sarah or Ben's lap, sighing contentedly as they petted him. That scientific finding, that eye contact between dogs and humans increases oxytocin, the love hormone, in both species, became a living reality in their home. The love was visible, tangible, and mutual. 6 months after his rescue, Bear was barely recognizable as the same dog. He had not only survived, he had thrived. He was a cherished member of their family, a daily reminder that even the most broken spirits can be healed by patience, safety, and unwavering love. He was a dog the world had forgotten, left to die alone in the cold depths of the forest. But for Sarah and Ben, he became the one they could never forget, the one who taught them about resilience, about the power of compassion, and about the incredible capacity for healing that exists in every living creature. In saving Bear, they discovered that rescue is never a one-way street. While they gave him a second chance at life, he gave them something equally precious, a deeper understanding of what it means to love unconditionally, to have patience when it matters most, and to believe that kindness is never wasted. Bear's transformation stands as a powerful reminder that every animal deserves a chance, that healing is possible, and that the bond between humans and dogs is one of the most profound connections we can experience. His story is a testament to the resilience of the spirit and the transformative power of love, proof that with enough patience and compassion, even the deepest wounds can heal, and even the most terrified hearts can learn to trust again.